I'm coming at you today from a service road in a patch of beautiful sandy Wallum heath on the Australian east coast. This is Bribie Island. These service roads are basically put through the entire national park as a way to get from one end of the island to the other for emergency services, and also as a fire break. These habitats, though, they're adapted very closely along fire. The European civilization that's moved in here isn't, so we try and protect our suburbs by creating these fire breaks. Also creates a really nice opportunity for walking and to see some unique plants. So I'm here today to look for some carnivorous plants, and along this road I've recorded about half a dozen different species in the past. I'm going to see if we can get close to that today. Right now, we're looking at a climbing sundew. This is the only tuberous species that we'll find on Bribie Island. This is Drosera lunata. They're a little bit dry, these specimens, though it is the middle of their growing season here in winter. So let's carry on and see what else we can find. Here's another very cute little species of carnivorous plant. This one's really quite difficult to film just because of its size. But see those little purple UFO-shaped flowers? That is Utricularia lateriflora. These guys have traps underneath their soil, on their roots, and they trap tiny little subterranean prey by sucking them into a bladder network. Gives them the name bladderworts, or fairies' aprons. There's quite a nice common name for them, judging by their shape. There's a number of species along here. This is the first one I've seen yet. Here's a better one. Just a better look at the Drosera lunata. Now, all carnivorous plants have evolved to be carnivorous for a reason, and it's why you generally see lots of species growing together even if they're not closely related. And that reason is generally nutrient-poor soils. And here on Bribie, it's a sand island. You can see what they're growing in. It's just white sand. There's really not a lot of food in that for them. So that's why these plants have created ways to basically catch their food from the sky in the form of flying insects. They digest them, break down the nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus in insects, and that's where they get their food. These Wallum heathland habitats, they're characterised by the white sandy base. It's very nutrient poor, and so it restricts a lot of the plant growth to quite short. You see a lot of the trees in this area, they sort of tap out around 3 or 4 metres high. You won't get the really tall canopy species like you would even in just the nearby eucalypt forests. But that name, Wallum, it's actually an indigenous word, and it's the indigenous word for this species here. This is Banksia emula, and emula means to emulate, and what it's emulating is a very similar, almost identical species that grows in the eucalypt, and that species is called Banksia serrata, and it will get huge, many metres tall, but it's almost identical in flowers and its bark and its leaves. This one here, Banksia emula, it'll tap out around that 3 or 4 metres. You might get one to get about 8 or 9 metres, but it'd be a really happy plant if it gets that tall. Beautiful plant. It's your pretty classic Australian old man Banksia. You see the old woolly ones. They're the old flowers that they hang on to for ages. And this plant is actually a fire-dependent species. You can see those little mouths. The resin that holds those shut is like a glue, and when fire comes through, it literally melts the seed pods open, allowing the seeds to fall to the ground. These trees are extremely resistant to fire, and if you have a look at their bark up close, it crumbles. And so what happens is fire can't get purchase into the hardwood. It just gets onto here and rubs off onto the ground, and fire can't get any proper heat or any purchase into the forest. It just whittles away in here. It means that you can have low, cool burning fires in the ground to clear up all the hard deadwood, but it doesn't get up and kill the trees. It's just enough to melt those little mouths open. You can see this one's open. Here's our third carnivorous plant. This one's one of the perennials. These guys you can see all year round. They don't go down into a bulb during summer. This is Drosera spatulata, and it's a really widespread species. It's found in most parts of eastern Australia. It's found in New Zealand. It's found through parts of Asia as well. It's got pretty purple flowers. You get the occasional one that's an albino form with the white blooms. And they grow alongside. You can see this is one of the climbing ones that I've already talked about. They grow alongside these and a couple of other species which I'll try and track down. A few more of those spatulatas growing in a nice little patch. You can see how soggy and boggy the soil is. They really are a wetland plant. They don't like to dry out. on a little bit of a roll here. Got two more species to show you back to back. At my fingertip there, that is the smallest species of sundew that we have in Queensland. This is appropriately named Drosera pygmaea, and it's in a completely different group. It's still Drosera, but it's part of the pygmy Drosera group. Most of them are found in Western Australia. This is the only one that makes it across to the east coast. Very widespread species in Australia, but one that not a lot of people see just because it's so tiny. And in this white sand, when you're walking along and there's lots of them, they almost look like little drops of blood. It's quite eerie, quite pretty. This is another bladderwort species, similar to the purple one I showed you before, but it's got different shaped flowers. And if you can, I don't know if I can get it to focus, you can see the little white stripes there. Kind of looks like the bottom jaw of a skull. This is Utricularia cerulea, also known as the blue bladderwort. Quite a big, tall flower spike too. Normally you don't get them that tall. Cool little species, and great to see both miniatures next to each other. The other habitat that is often found, almost always found, alongside Wallum heathland, it's almost synonymous with the sort of land zone. It's the same nutrient poor, white sandy soil. But when you move out of the higher ground, out of the Banksia emula forest, you start to get into the thickets of paperbark. Paperbark trees, melaleuca trees, another iconic Aussie native. These guys create a really different habitat, even though they're in the same sort of soil and right next to Wallum. You won't really find too many of the banksias growing amongst these, and you won't find too many of these growing amongst the banksias. They play along and they keep to their own turf, but they both have very vital roles. The paperbarks are able to soak up a lot more water. You often find them in the lower areas. They grow a lot closer together and they form more of a marsh. Whereas the Wallum heathland is more of a higher sandy dune habitat surrounded by these sort of valleys of the paperbark. Another thing the paperbark does is it's a really, really good fire retardant. When fire comes through and it's just too hot for the Wallum, if that banksia is not able to keep the fire at bay with all of its adaptations, once it hits the paperbark, fire pretty much stops. It's very, very hard for fire to move through this wet, papery, spongy bark of these trees, and because they grow so close together, you can see there's a nice thicket there, all with the blackened trunks. And so as fire moves through, I'll move over there so you can see a little bit closer. As fire moves through, it's not able to actually get through into the bark in a similar way to the banksias, but these guys handle it better. And these wet habitats, these wet melaleuca habitats, they sort of form these veins in between the Wallum habitats and the eucalypt habitats. You can see the bark under there is all fresh. That fire didn't get into the trees at all, but it's cleared up the ground beautifully. And so these melaleuca habitats, they're really, really important. It's where a lot of the frogs breed. It's where a lot of the animals feed. It's where a lot of animals seek shelter when it's not raining because they're so dense. Just a great habitat to have, and one that's often overlooked because it's seen as a bit messy. You don't get as many of the pretty wildflowers and interesting plants and biodiversity, but if it weren't for these rather simple habitats alongside the complex ones like Wallum, then fire would just destroy the Wallum completely. From one tiny plant to another, I just showed you the smallest sundew. Well, this is the smallest bladderwort. I didn't think I'd see it today. I thought they'd all be finished flowering, but I found just a couple. I can't really get it to focus really well, but that's its flower. This is Utricularia minutissima. And in a lot of the field guides, they're recorded much further north. The southern populations have really only been fairly recently observed and recently described. So we have yet to find out if this is actually a new species or if it is the same minutissima that's found up north, but yeah, time will tell. Hardly a walk in the Aussie bush without coming across a nice little billabong. How's this? You can see how dark and tannin stained the waters are. This is mainly due to all of the melaleuca and leptospermum in the area. They stain the waters a real dark tea colour. And because of that, the pH of the water's really low. In some areas in these shallow billabongs, the pH can be similar to vinegar and lemon juice. It's really, really acidic. But that doesn't forbid animals from living and breeding in these waters. There's a couple of quite rare native fish, that live in here, namely the honey blue eyes. It's a species I adore, but I've never had the chance to see it in the wild. This is its habitat. It's a little tiny bright yellow fish with blue eyes. And another one, or another two animals that are really, really important to this area are the acid frogs. We've got a reed frog species and a little brown toadlet species. They're both day callers, which is nice. You can be out here in the middle of a sunny day in the middle of winter and the frogs are calling. They sound a little bit like cicadas, but rest assured they are frogs. And this is the sort of habitat that they breed in. Their tadpoles are adapted to really low pH and really acidic waters that can get really hot in summer. Being shallow and being this dark color, it absorbs a lot of heat. And so these taddies are being raised in some of the most inhospitable conditions, but they turn into this really delicate, little tiny, really important, ecologically important frog. And we are extremely lucky that on Bribie Island, I can drive 5 minutes from the suburbs and be in beautiful national park like this. Even though there's a lot of fire breaks and a lot of human disturbance, a lot of clearing, there's still a lot of wildlife, there's a lot of endemic plants. Though they do build the suburbs a little close. I'm in National Park right now and there's houses, but they must have a beautiful view. I hope people that live this close to nature appreciate what they've got and don't just want to keep removing trees to make their yard bigger. You know, if you're going to live on an island that is more than half of its percentage national park and protected, then you live there for that reason, not the fact that it's a beach getaway. So we really need to love and appreciate the things that we have on these threatened habitats, because yeah, they won't be around forever. Just love this as an adaptation. It's so clever. So many species in the Melaleuca group share this. They sort of all get lumped in and called paperbarks. There used to be a genus that a lot of people still use and still refer to called Callistemon, and it basically referred to the woody barked bottle brushes. But there was some work done and they lumped them together. Still not sure how valid it is, but apparently they're all Melaleuca now. But if you see up in the tree there's that bright green ball, kind of stands out a little bit. That's one of our native mistletoe species. Mistletoe are actually a parasite or a hemiparasite. They don't take all of their nutrients from their host. They do a little bit of their own work. That's why they're green. They do photosynthesize after all, but it is completely reliant on this tree for a home. And it's there's many species, and they're all quite ecologically important. There's a number of birds that pollinate them called the mistletoe birds, and they all have very pretty flowers. But yeah, a lot of people know of mistletoe, namely for its Christmas motif, but yeah, it is a species you can see in a lot of countries, and a lot of different native species are symbiotic with particular trees. This is a species that you'll almost exclusively find in the Melaleucas, and occasionally when it pops up in the she oaks, it really stands out like a sore thumb because the leaves just don't match up at all. Yeah, interesting species. That pretty much does it for this little Wallum adventure. I'm on my way back now. If you enjoyed, had any questions, leave a comment, and yeah, tell me what you want to see next.